Morning in progress.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another beautiful day and Tanya study together. Next Wednesday, we don't have class because it's the beautiful holiday of Shavuot. Instead of having a Tanya class, we have the reading of the Ten Commandments when we recommit ourselves to the ways of the Torah. It's a very special holiday. We would love to celebrate the holiday of Shavuot with you. It'll be right here. Wednesday morning, we have services. Wednesday evening, afternoon at 5 p.m., we'll have the reading of the Ten Commandments. If you can't make it in the morning, it'll be followed with a dairy dinner. I would love for all of you to come. We'll have an ice cream party as well. So that will be next Wednesday. So again, no class next Wednesday. So we'll try to cover some good ground today as we enter halfway through Igeret Teshuva, the letter of Teshuva, authored by the Alter Rebbe, taking incredible teachings from the Kabbalah, understanding the soul of Teshuva, the depths and the inner workings of Teshuva. We're in chapter 6, which is on page 87 if you're looking in the book. And Chava, I didn't even know an ice cream emoji exists. So that's really cool. Okay, thank you. This is a good one where it's called the meaning of exile. Last week, I gave kind of an overview of the chapter, which was really, I guess, a good introduction as we are explaining over here the difference between the reality of the world when it was in the time of the temple and the reality the way it is in the time of exile. And understanding that difference will help us answer the question that we asked in chapter 4, which was, why is it that nowadays, when a person commits a sin that's considered karis, which means in temple times they would be cut off, they would die prematurely, they would die by the age of 50 or 60. Nowadays, that doesn't happen. People, they do bad things and they live a good, prosperous life. Why do we see a difference, such a contrast? And how does that make sense? So we're answering over here that there is a difference between the reality that existed during times of the temple, which was a godly, divine reality where we were connected intimately with the truth of God, with the existence of God around us, with the presence, and the reality the way it is during time of exile, which the way I coined it last week during our introduction class was a non-ideal reality, where the exiled place is a place where we don't see godliness open, we don't see miracles open, but it's specifically here that we have to do the job. We're not in a position where we're not as good. There's actually something to be said specifically of the exile that we're in and why we're here kind of in a way that's beyond even what we could exceeds even what we're able to accomplish during the times of the temple. So let's read that inside now, chapter 6. I'll share it on the Kindle. Am I missing anything out? Right. So we're in a state of compensation. That was the word I used last week. It's a different model than temple times. A compensation model rather than a balanced model, which was what temple times had. So let's see that inside chapter 6. Of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Let's see it. In chapter, so the title is called The Meaning of Exile, section 1, which is the non-effect of karis, which is that excision punishment during exile. In chapter 4, the Tanya noted that in earlier times, the transgressor would actually die physically before reaching the age of 50. And for a transgression whose punishment is death through the agency of heaven, he would literally die physically before reaching the age of 60. Why did this only occur in earlier times and not nowadays? So the Tanya will now address this point. However, this physical death resulting from karis only occurred during in earlier generations when the Jewish people were at a high spiritual level, and when the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence, rested in Israel in the Holy Temple. This high spiritual level resulted in a different relationship between the divine soul and its body. And then, being at a high spiritual level, the people of Israel only received energy to their bodies through the divine soul alone. Meaning to say, i.e., from a deep flow coming from the blessed infinite one through the tetragrammaton, which is God's holy name, known as Havaya, as above, chapter 4. In temple times, the body was directly powered by the divine soul, which, as we learned earlier, delivers the energy of the Tetragrammaton. So if you remember in chapter 4, we went through the shapes of the letters, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, how it exists in God's Sefirot, in God's 10 energies of creating the world, where we said Yud is the energy, the Sephira, the divine light of Chachma, of God's wisdom. The Hey, which is more expanded, is the divine light of God's understanding, which is God's um, cognitive intelligence in creating the world in an expanding way. And then we had the Vav, which was the midot, the attributes of God of feelings, from love, which is chesed and kindness, all the way through Yesod, which is communication. It was the 6 levels of Sefirot that is drawing down from God's energy into creating the world. And then finally we had the level of Malchus, which is God's kingship or royalty, which is how it actually came into effect, the ability of action of relating to another. And then we explained that the same exists also within God, the soul that God created, meaning the soul of man. And we explained that the 4 letters of God's name, the way it exists in divine energy of Sefirot, also exists in our soul. So our soul is receiving its life force directly from the name of God, directly from the Tetragrammaton, the name Havaya, those 4 Hebrew letters. But now we're saying that was really during temple times. The flow of energy that came into us in our life came directly from God's holy name. However, and therefore, if a person sinned, it cut off their relationship to their life force, to God's name, and therefore they would pass away. However, this changed after their spiritual level declined with the temple's destruction, and they caused through their negative actions the mystical exile of the Shekhinah. The exile of the Shekhinah is known in Hebrew as galut, and that's actually the word we say over here, galut, which is the exile. That through the temple destruction and our spiritual level decline, and then through this galut and our negative actions, we exile the Shekhinah. As the verse states, through your transgressions is your mother sent away. That's a quote from Isaiah. The destruction of the temple was not only a physical displacement from our most holy site, it also caused an alienation of the divine presence, which is the Shekhinah, from the world. This is called the mystical exile of the Shekhinah. Since Shekhinah is feminine, divine energy, its exile is referred to by the verse, your mother sent away. So the Shekhinah, that's actually also related to Shabbat. We know that Shabbat is known as the Shabbat queen. And the way a lot of our prayers on Shabbat is referring to the feminine side of God, because that's the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah, divine presence, is the feminine side of God. So over here it refers to the Galut as your mother was sent away, because it's referring to the feminine side. And good morning, Nancy. And good morning, Naomi. So this is just a really important point, that the destruction of the temple, it wasn't just a displacement of our bodies, it was a displacement of the Shekhinah. The divine presence was exiled together with us. And since there was an exile of the Shekhinah, there was a spiritual decline. And as a result, we're not as in tune with our spiritual, with the soul's not in tune with the spiritual life the way it was during the times of the temple. So how does the departure of Shekhinah affect the energetic flow to our world? So now we'll put the pieces of the puzzle together. This means to say that the energetic flow from the second lower hay of the Tetragrammaton mentioned above in chapters 4 and 5 was downgraded multiple times in a descending chain of events. Let me just see that word again. Downgraded several times to the point where the energy of the second hay of the Tetragrammaton became filtered through the 10 Sefirot or energies of Noga. So here we're going to get a little bit in depth about klipa. So just to give you, we're going to give an analysis over here in the next few paragraphs. But in Hebrew, there's a term known as klipa. Klipa literally would mean the husk or the shell. And it's the energy that is unholy or ungodly, where we have godly energy. And then you have klipa, which is the external force that's trying to cover over the godly energy. It's known in Hebrew as klipa. But now within klipa, you have two types of klipa. You have the three unholy klipot, which are totally unholy and can be elevated or refined. But then you also have an energy known as noga. Noga, we explained in the first chapter of Tanya, is what's has the potential to be holy, but also has the potential to be unholy. It's kind of neutral, and it depends what you do to it. It'll define where it's going to go. So, for example, tefillin is holy. A pork sandwich is unholy. That can't be elevated. But then most of the other things in life, like a coffee that I'm holding or the computer that we're on, that's noga, which means it's neutral. It has the potential to be elevated if you do the right thing with it, and it has the potential to be downgraded if you do the wrong thing with it. So if you take a kosher food, but you don't make a blessing on it, or if you take the energy from that food and you don't use it out properly, which means you use it out for an unholy sake, you're downgrading the energy of that food. But if you take the energy that you consume from that food and you use it for something holy, and obviously if you make a blessing on it, you're then elevating the that noga to a spiritual, to a holy place. That's in Hebrew known as klipat noga. And that's what we're going to explain now, exists in our generation, where everything is now in a place of noga. As we learned at length in part one of Tanya, noga is a type of klipa, or negative energy, that conceals the presence of God. Noga too has 10 negative sefirot, mirroring the 10 positive energies. This is because God has made one opposite the other, so that the architecture of the negative realm mirrors the positive. The Tanya teaches us here that while in temple times, the soul had direct access to the energy of the Tetragrammaton, once the Shekhinah was exiled, that access stopped. It sounds so sad to say that, no? That in temple times, the soul had access directly to God's holy name. Now that access kind of stopped. Now the entire universe is sustained through the filter of Klippa, which hides God's presence. So it sounds sad, but it's the reality of where we're in now, where God's presence is exiled, or over here it says concealed, and it's hidden. And therefore, everything in our life comes through a filter called Klippa, which means that we have to dig deeper to find that godly energy, which is still there, is just through a filter. Prior to that, meaning before the exile, the 10 spheres of Noga already provided the energetic flow of energy to the constellations and all the heavenly bodies, and the angels appointed over them, which provide the energetic flow to every living thing in this physical world, even to vegetation. As in the teachings of our sages, there is no blade of grass below that does not have a mazal, which is a spiritual energy, that strikes it and says grow. Meaning every blade of grass has a mazal, has a constellation, has an energy that's keeping it alive. This physical world has always been powered by Noga. In temple times, an exception was made, and the bodies of Israel were able to be powered directly through the energy of the Tetragrammaton in their souls. With the destruction of the temple and the departure of the Shekhinah, this stopped, and the bodies of Israel became powered by Noga like the rest of the physical world. So then, during exile, even people who transgress and join the sinners of Israel, which is an expression basically saying that we're not doing the appropriate things, even they are able to receive energy for their bodies and animal souls in exactly the same way as other living creatures. As the verse states, he is likened to beasts that are doomed. God energizes the powers of Noga regardless of their behavior. So during exile, even if a person receives charis and is cut off from the Tetragrammaton, he can continue to live, since his body is in any case not energized by the Tetragrammaton, but from Noga, whose energetic flow is unconditional. So just to summarize, I think it's a very powerful idea, but the whole world comes and receives energy from God's holy name. But there's a filter. It's called Noga. Noga filters the energy from God's holy name into the world. So it's an interface of God's holy name to allow that energy flow to come into the world from for every creation of the world. During temple times, there was an exception that the bodies of Israel were able to receive that energy flow directly from the Tetragrammaton without the need of that filter, without the need of that klipa. But after the temple was destroyed, that filter was put in place even for the bodies of Israel, for the Jewish people, and therefore, even regardless of a person's behavior, that noga energy is giving life through that filter of noga, and therefore, it's unconditional. And even if a person is undeserving of it, they're still able to get that flow of energy, even if they are wicked and did negative things. Let's just see this Hasidic thought over here, which is the letter from the Rebbe. It doesn't say the date, so I can't tell you more about it. But on page 88 at the bottom, it says like this: we recognize the exile as a punishment and rectification for failure to live up to our obligations in the past, as indeed we acknowledge in our prayers. And it says in our prayers, for our sins, we were banished from our land. In Hebrew, that's mipnei chataenu galinu me'artzenu. But punishment, according to our Torah, called Torah chesed, a Torah of kindness, must also essentially be chesed. So Torah can't only, the idea of not following the ways of the Torah and it leads to punishment is unbecoming of understanding that truthfully as Torah. Torah is a Torah of kindness, and therefore even the punishments in it have to be something of kindness. And I guess what would the kindness be over here? If I'm understanding correctly, it's that after temple times, regardless of a person's behavior, they still are able to get an energy flow from divine, from a source of holiness through the filter of noga. And that's, I guess, a kindness that was made from the Torah. Okay, so that's so just a few beautiful points that come out of this. It's a pretty heavy section that we just read, but the point of what I'm understanding is, first of all, it's incredible to think that everything has a mazal, a constellation, and usually we understand the constellation. So let me just explain the way it is over here. The mazal means that there's a filter, and everything comes through a filter into this world. It says that the Jewish people are not ruled by a mazal, which means during temple times we had direct access to the name of God, and we weren't under the mazal flow of energy, any constellations. But after temple times, when the galus, the exile, was a reality, which means the Shekhinah, God's holy name, was exiled, then we don't have direct access. As it was, it comes through this filter of noga, and therefore you could even see the wicked prosper as a result of this noga energy that they're able to tap into. And that's if I'm understanding it that way. Go ahead, Naomi. Let's stop sharing. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, so I got stopped and hearing about and reading about how the Torah is kind, and implying that everything that God does is kind, and even the punishments are kind. And I still have trouble with this concept when we read the Torah Parsha. It was last week's about all the horrible things that are going to happen to the Jewish people for not living a Torah lifestyle. That they're going to eat their children, God forbid, and 10 women are going to bake the bread in one oven, I don't know how to turn that into kindness. And I understand. I think it was maybe the Zemek Tzedek, one of the rabbis said it's always kind. When he hears his father read it, it's always kind. But how do we make that kind?
Good question. Meaning, how do we see the blessing in what doesn't seem like an open blessing, right?
Right.
So, in short, I mean, I don't have the full answer. I know on Shabbos, Steve was with us, and we discussed this, understanding more of those blessings, and people had some really good questions on it. Of why do they put all the curses in one area, but the blessings you don't see the same level, like in the Torah portion, he had a lot of curses. He only had 2 aliyahs of blessing. So we had some really good questions on the topic. I think you have to be on a high level, like a tzaddik, to be able to uncover that blessing within it. Go ahead, Jira. Yes.
So I was going to say, even though you have what the 98 curses,
Yeah, and then last week's Torah portion was 48, 49, and
Right.
in Deuteronomy we will have the 98. Yeah.
the 98.
Yeah.
So the blessing, I think, is even after all the curses are announced, Hashem is not going to abandon the people, right?
Yeah, he still
So
doesn't
there's
abandon
still
us.
kindness there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I mean, Naomi, we're not going to go into a full parsha class over here, but for a parent to tell a child and punish the child if they're running across the street or touching fire, there's obviously they're doing the right thing. The child in their mind, they can't see it. And it says when Mashiach comes, we'll actually thank God for all the hardships and all the suffering that we have. It's not a level that most of us are on now. That's something, God willing, when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to appreciate. But over here, at least, the point is that the Galus, which is the exile of the divine Shekhinah, God's divine presence, it made everything, and including also the Jewish people, be under a filter of Noga, which means we have access to divine energy flow, even when we're undeserving of it. During temple times, the whole reality was you're tuned into with direct access to God's name. So therefore, if you're tuned in, you get it. If you're not tuned in, you don't get it. But so the kindness over here is even at a time that we're in a time of exile, there is a kindness that there's a filter in place, which usually a filter means we're one step removed. We're not getting the organic, the direct, but the blessing or the kindness is even people that are undeserving are still able to receive. And that is an absolute kindness. They're not deserving of it, and they're still getting. So I mean, section 2, it's gonna seem like not such a kindness because bad people are getting incredible blessings, and that doesn't seem fair. So the question will be, why do the wicked prosper? Why do people that are so evil and do such evil things, why do we see them being so successful? The answer we gave already is because once the filter was put in place of Noga, they don't need to deserve it. But then it makes it a little unfair for the rest of us that are trying so hard. So it's a long section, and there's a lot to talk about in it. We'll see. Let's see if we could get through it. Okay, so section 2, why the wicked prosper. If you're looking in the book, it's on page 89 all the way at the bottom. We have clarified why in earlier times the transgressor would actually die physically before reaching the age of 50, but not in exile times. And the answer we gave is because during temple times, they had direct access to God's holy name, the name Havaya, Tetragrammaton. And therefore, if they cut themselves off from it, their life flow stopped. But in exile times where we're receiving the energy through a filter of Noga, therefore we could live out our lives even not feeling connected to the name of Havaya. Now we will turn to another question posed in chapter 4. How could those who are liable for curse live long, happy lives? And that's a really powerful question, meaning we all have that question. Why do the wicked prosper? Why do good things happen to bad people and bad things to good people? On the contrary, those who are liable for curse can receive their energetic flow more powerfully, with more strength and more power, and therefore they live long, happy lives. So this is an irony, right? The irony is that they're wicked, and because of their wickedness, they actually prosper more. And it just doesn't seem fair, but that's what we see, reality. So now the Tanya is going to explain it, this irony based on the teaching of the Zohar, as is explained by the Holy Zohar in his commentary on the Torah portion of Pekudei, that all of the energetic flow which a person receives in this world below, at the very moment he sins and does evil in the eyes of God, by transgressing in action, in speech, or in thought, through contemplating a sin, etc., at that moment, energy flows to him exclusively from the chambers of Sitra Achra, as explained in the Zohar. So when a person is committing a sin, the flow that they're receiving is from a place of Sitra Achra, which is another word for Klipa. As we have seen in the previous section, during exile times, the body is energized by the negative forces of Noga. However, if a person chooses to sin, At that moment, his body is energized by a far more negative energy, which is the Sitra Achra, which is completely negative. Noga, on the other hand, has a positive side and can become a vehicle for the positive and the holy through the appropriate actions and consciousness. So we have Noga, and then we have Sitra Achra, which is the other side, which is completely negative. When a person sins, they're receiving their energy from Sitra Achra, which is completely the other side. And a person has free choice whether to accept the completely negative flow from the chambers of Sitra Achra or to receive flow from the chambers of holiness, which power all good thoughts, etc. For God has made one opposite the other, and we have the choice. As we discussed at length in part 1, everything we do, say, or think can either strengthen the forces of good or the Sitra Achra, depending on the choice of activity and the consciousness with which we direct it. The Tanya further explains the damage caused by a sin. Without sinful activity, the chambers of Sitra Achra usually receive and suck their energy flow from what has been downgraded and filtered into the 10 spheres of Noga. And Noga is not completely evil. It contains both good and evil, having the energy of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as is known to Kabbalists. In the absence of sinful activity, the Sitra Achra receives its energy from Noga, which contains a mixture of good and evil. Through a sin, however, the Sitra Achra is granted an independent source of energy from the soul of the sinner, powered by the Tetragrammaton, and this inflates the Sitra Achra with a power it should never have. So, well, this is incredible of an idea. If I'm understanding correctly, God made everything balanced, or one opposite the other. So there's a power in the source in the place of kedusha, but there's also a strength, a force in the side of Sitra Achra. We have the choice to receive our energy from either side, from the kedusha side, the holy side, or from the klipa side, from the unholy side. Now, Noga, which is from the unholy side, is a mixture of good and evil, like the tree, like that Adam and Eve ate from. It was a mixture of good and evil. But when a person sins, they actually take Sitra Achra as an independent source and are receiving directly from the Tetragrammaton, if I'm understanding it correctly, a place that they should never have energy from, which is a hard thing to understand. I'm just going to see if maybe there's a little more in this Hasidic thought. On page 90, there's another letter from the Rebbe. This is from 1978, where the Rebbe says like this: the extraordinary quality of Teshuva, which transcends all limitations, including the limitations of time, is that in one moment, it transforms the whole past to the degree of absolute perfection in quality and spirituality. So I don't see how this totally relates to the idea. I have to ask the author. Actually, the author of this translation, his name is Rabbi Chaim Miller. His picture is right here on the book. His daughter is actually going to be our counselor. She's coming in 3 weeks, on June 24th for our summer camp. So maybe I'll ask her. I was in touch with her father a little bit just about camp and logistics. So maybe I could ask her what her father meant when he put this letter of the Rebbe excerpt over here. So I'm not sure exactly. But I guess we'll have to go further. Maybe if we see a little further, what is going on over here? Okay, so let's see the top of the Kindle page, the bottom of 91, if you're looking in the book. The Tanya will illustrate this point with our earlier rope analogy. In Hebrew, it's called a chavel, used in a different context above in chapter 5. For its application here, see Shalah and other sources. Now the verse states, Yaakov or Jacob, his allotted chavel, inheritance. So we compare the Jewish people to a chavel, to a usually would mean allotted, but over here we're going to take a more literal as a rope, which offers us a practical illustration of how a sin channels negative energy as follows. Just as with a rope, which has one end above and the other below, if a person will pull at the second bottom end, the top end will move to be drawn towards him to the extent that he is able to pull it. So meaning as much as he could pull it, the top of the rope also moves down. So too precisely is the case with a human soul, rooted in the energy of the second, lower hay of the tetragrammaton as above. A person's bad actions, thoughts, cause the energy of the lower hay to, so to speak, be drawn and pulled down into the chambers of Sitra Achra. So give an example of a rope over here for understanding correctly. If you have a rope, let's say this is the top. So if you pull the bottom, what happens is the top also gets lowered. It's not only affecting the bottom, but as much as you can pull the bottom, the top will be lowered as well also. So when a person sins, which is at the bottom end of this rope, they're taking their source of energy, which is from the name of God, and you're lowering that into the place where the sin is being committed, into the place of unholiness, to the place of Sitra Achra. So since the Torah compares Jacob, the house of Jacob, the Jewish people, to a rope, so just like a rope, you have one end at the top and one end at the bottom. And when you pull the bottom end, it also pulls the top end lower. So to also, when a soul is committing something negative and they're lowering the energy of God's name and being pulled down into the place of klipa. So this only explains one half of it. We'll have to see further. So now we just know that you're lowering the godly energy into a place of klipa, but it doesn't explain yet how this inflates the klipa to receive directly from God's name. That we'll have to explain a little further. And this explains, yes, Naomi, go ahead.
So what I'm picturing is that even though when pulling the rope down is bringing negative energy,
Yeah.
But it's also lowering the top of the rope, which
Yeah.
is the positive energy. So my understanding from what you said or read is that that's why wicked people live longer, because they're still pulling down that rope and getting the holy energy.
I guess so. I mean, I think that's what he's probably going to say in the next in the next paragraph. But I think that would answer the question, right? Let's read the next paragraph. I think that's probably where he's going. So, but so far, all we know is that the person sinning, they're lowering the divine energy into a place of klipa. And finishing that sentence exactly, I think is the way you just explained it. But let's just see in the next line inside. I think that's what he's going to answer. But let's just double check. And this explains why those liable for karis, which is that death penalty of dying by the age of 50 or 60, live long, happy lives, since they draw from the Sitra Achra more powerfully. For the Sitra Achra is where the evil thoughts and deeds are received. And since this person is the one who is directing the flow there, giving the power of the tetragrammaton to the Sitra Achra, therefore this person is the one that receives the first portion, a flow from the Sitra Achra. The sinner has provided the Sitra Achra with a far greater energy supply than it could otherwise have obtained. So the Sitra Achra rewards the sinner with the first portion, a bountiful flow of energy. That is why sinners can live long, happy lives. And this explanation should suffice for the intelligent reader. So let's just pause there. And Naomi, it's exactly as you were saying. So you're definitely that intelligent reader. And kudos to you. But if we're understanding correctly, there's a divine energy flow that's coming from God's name. And when a person sins, they're pulling that divine energy into the place of klipa. So which means you're giving a strong energy of life force into the place of klipa. Since you're sinning, you're choosing to receive your energy from the place of klipa, and you're bringing that energy of divine holiness into the place of klipa, which is far more than they deserve. So therefore, you're being rewarded by klipa for your nourishment to them.
Sure.
And in that case, they're going to give you first dibs. They're going to give you a first portion. And that's how a person could live a happy life, by sinning, because they're feeding the place of klipa. So if we're understanding correctly, klipa is the outside. Usually they don't get a full divine energy flow. They're just getting the leftovers. But when a person sins, they're taking their energy source, which is from God's name, and they're feeding it, they're diverting it into the place of klipa directly. So the klipa is receiving an energy that they don't deserve, and as a reward to you for doing that, they're going to give you a high portion. So if we were to stop here, I'm scared what's going to happen. We'll all just run out, go and sin, and feel like we're getting a high level of reward. So I think now, hopefully we'll be able to finish the chapter and see the full picture here. But I
Rabbi,
would love
this is
to.
Nancy.
Yeah, hi Nancy.
This is Nancy. I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole time, but I did read ahead because I was
Oh,
concerned
so
with
please,
what.
yeah, it is
Uh,
concerning, right?
it's to me this is also responds to what the question Naomi was bringing about blessings and curses. I mean, what we
Sure.
have learned from you and from Chabad and our sages is that we don't understand curses. That curses are actually blessings to be understood at some time in the future. We could say it's when the Messiah comes, but it's even things that looked bad to us when they occurred later on, we have a different perspective. And when we look at what is in the next few paragraphs, it reiterates something that kind of is a corollary, which is we do not fathom the happy life that a sinner is enjoying. We can't fathom. We look at it from the outside and we think, oh, they're living a great life. We don't really know the depths of their anguish, the depths of their suffering, because that's not our position to know. That's really God's position to know, which is kind of goes along with, we're not supposed to be judging other people. We're not supposed to be saying, oh, they're living a good life. We don't really understand. That's not really within our purview to understand. It just a little comment that you
Yeah.
have taught us over time that I wanted to share.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Well said. Well said. So it's still like we have to get to the end of this point of how is it that they're able to prosper based on the place of sin. And Nancy, you have a point that we don't know what's really going on inside of them. But if you look at the next line of the Tanya, he quotes an incredible Mishnah, which we just read, in Pirkei Avot, which is Ethics of the Fathers. We read a chapter every Shabbat in the summer months. So this past Shabbat, we read chapter 5, and it's a quote from this Mishnah of Pirkei Avot that says we don't understand it, and that's actually what he's about to say. And Nancy, we've been missing your Parsha teachings and lessons, so we hope we get that back now that you're back home. Okay, so we're up to the middle of the Kindle page, towards the top of 93, and we'll finish the chapter actually pretty soon. So let's see if we get to the idea here. The Tanya offers a further support for the above explanation from the Mishnah. So what was the Mishnah? Let me just go back. Which Mishnah are we talking about? Oh, I'm sorry. This is, what was the Mishnah we were just talking about? About the rope. Which is probably this Yuma. From the analogy of the rope. I'm assuming that's the Mishnah we're referring to. Yeah, so we had a few important points over here. We had a quote from a Zohar that says that he receives his energy flow from Sitra Achra. And now we just explained it similar to a rope, that a rope, when you pull it down, the top of the rope is being lowered as well. So when a person sins, they're lowering the divine energy flow into the place of Klipa, and they get rewarded for that. And on that, he quoted from the Mishnah and the Talmud that says that's how a person could receive the first portion, because he's being rewarded for his feeding of klipa from the higher source of divine energy. I think that was the source. But now we are in the middle of the Kindle page and the middle of the top of the 93. And this is the meaning of what our sages taught. It is not in our hands to fathom the peace of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous, which is the Mishnah from Pirkei Avot. The key emphasis here being it's not in our hands, meaning our post-temple exilic times. Our hands meaning emphasis on our hands, the way it is in exile times. We don't understand how it is that they prosper and the righteous suffer. Close reading of the Mishnah supports our above insight into the long, happy lives of the wicked. The Mishnah, which was authored during exile, states, it is not in our hands to fathom the peace of the wicked, suggesting that the happy lives of the wicked is a phenomenon of our hands, meaning it's of exile times. The above explanation will also help us to explain more profoundly the exile of the Shekhinah in metaphysical terms. And this is the exile of the Shekhinah, so to speak, that she is forced to provide energetic flow to the chambers of the Sitra Achra, which God deeply detests. So this is an incredible idea where part of the exile is the heart, the challenge that the Shekhinah has, that it has to feed the klipa side, meaning it's extremely uncomfortable to have to feed the area which is detested, which is disgusted by God. And that itself is the definition of its exile. Above, we learned that during exile, the lower hay of the tetragrammaton is exiled within the partially negative energy of Noga. Through sinful activity, however, an even deeper exile occurs as the energy of the lower hay of the tetragrammaton is directed by the sinner from his soul into the totally negative forces of klipa. This is a true exile of the Shekhinah. The chapter concludes on a positive note, how this damage can be rectified through Teshuva. And when a person will repent in an acceptable fashion, he or she removes the flow which he or she brought to the chambers of Sitra Achra through his or her deeds and thoughts, because his or her repentance restores the flow of Shekhinah to its appropriate place. And this is the meaning of Teshuva, spelling Tashuv, or returned hay, like we learned in chapter 4 from the Zohar, since it returns the lower hay, which is the Shekhinah, from a state of exile. As the verse states, God, your God, will return you from your captivity, as if to say, Shekhinah will herself return with your captivity, meaning when there's a return of the captivity, Shekhinah itself also gets redeemed. The Tanya cites the teaching of the Talmud, which illustrates this idea, as in the saying of our sages, the verse does not say he will bring back, but that he himself will return. It doesn't say he will bring back the Jewish people itself. He himself, meaning the Shekhinah itself, will return. So it's not only captivity being returned home, the captives being returned home, but it's also the divine Shekhinah itself being returned home. In the following chapter, we will discuss this concept and its practical implementation in more detail. So let's just read the practical lesson. If you sin, it drags the energy of the tetragrammaton from your soul down into the negative forces. But let's just summarize this idea, just to make sure it's clear, because it's a short chapter, but it's a deep idea. So if I could just summarize it in one or two paragraphs or 1 or 2 minutes. When we had an idealistic state of Judaism, which was during temple times, we received our energy flow directly from God's name. And that was the norm, that was the reality. And therefore, if we removed ourselves from this access, we would pass away. Our energy flow would be cut off, and then a person would pass away. During exile times, what happens is everything is being given through a filter, which is called Noga, and it's coming through this Noga filter, and therefore a person, even not fulfilling the ways and the methods of Torah, is still able to prosper because they're receiving it through the filter of Noga. But what happens is, just one step further, when a person sins, it's not the access, the energy flow is not just going to a place of Noga, it's going into a place of Klipa, which is undeserving of it. You're taking the rope that you're at the bottom of the rope and it's receiving from the top of the rope and you're pulling it down, and therefore you're giving from your energy flow into the place of klipa, which is unholy and unbecoming of such of such an energy, and therefore as a reward, it's giving you a bountiful amount. So, but the way we ended off is this is something that we can't fathom, we can't understand, that through a sin, in exile times, you're able to take the Shekhinah and bring it to a place of exile. The exile itself is happening to the Shekhinah, and through Teshuva, we're then able to correct it, we're able to fix it, and return the Shekhinah back home, if we're understanding that correctly, and repair the divine energy was put into a place of klipa, and through your teshuva, you're restoring the energy back to its original place, which is in God's name, and then you're also returning the Shekhinah back home, back to its source. If I'm understanding that correctly. If anyone has any comments on that, I would love to hear. Steve, does that sound right? It does say it suffices for an intelligent reader to understand it, but
Naomi.
oh, you're muted, Steve. Just unmute yourself. Sorry. Hold on. Still muted. Steve, unmute yourself first.
Hear you, Stephen. You're muted.
Almost. Oh, there you go. Let me ask you to unmute, see if that works.
There you go. Is that better?
Yep. Yep.
The notion of you are where your thoughts are kind of plays into that your Sheena is pulled into whatever it is that your mind wants it to go. Is it the same concept?
That's beautiful. That's actually a beautiful expression of it, because you're bringing the Shekhinah into exile through your, I mean, over here, the Tanya said your action, your speech, or where your thoughts are. That's where you're exiling the Shekhinah. If it's a negative thought, you're bringing the Shekhinah into that place of exile. Yeah.
So please remind me of the story of the young Rebbe who put on the beard and of his grandfather, and that's not me. And then when he left, isn't that the same story?
Why? How is that the same? So the story, in short, just for those that are not familiar with it, then you'll explain to me the connection. Where when the Alter Rebbe was a Rebbe, he was basically also the father for his grandson, because his grandson lost his father when he was 2 years old. So his grandfather, the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, the author of our Tanya, basically fathered him, and he was testing his grandson, where is Zaidi? Where is grandpa? And he would pull his beard, and he said, that's not Zaidi, that's Zaidi's beard. And he would point on his nose, and he said, that's not Zaidi, that's Zaidi's nose. And then it's the boy, the grandson, like almost looked like he gave up, and the grandfather walked away, and he said, Zaidi. And the grandfather turned around and he says, what's wrong, my dear? And he said, that's Zaidi, when he got the full energy of the grandfather. So how are you relating that, Steve?
So when you pulled your full energy into Klipa or Naga, whatever, that's what you become. That's who you are. That's all of you. And so that's the connection. And the other thought I had is we often talk about bar mitzvah as becoming a link in the chain, the great Jewish chain. We never talk about the fact that when you pull yourself down, you're pulling the whole chain down with you. And that's never mentioned to the bar mitzvah boy, as now you are a link in the chain. Keep your link up. So that's just a thought.
So, but that ties directly in. Do you think it would be appropriate to tell a 13-year-old? It might be, right? That you have a lot of pressure on you, because if you break that chain, you're not only, it's not, like, the example I think we gave earlier in the previous chapter about the boat. When you dig a hole on a boat, it's not yourself that's sinking, you're sinking everyone with you. And therefore it is our job to stop you from doing what you're doing, because the divine energy from all of us is being diverted to a place of klipa.
It's the same story, and it's more in a more intense version of that story. It's like you drill a hole, it's obvious. But the notion of you misbehave and you're pulling everybody in the chain above you down, that may be too heavy for a 13-year-old to understand, but it seems to be the concept that you want to get adults to understand, possibly. that being a link in a chain isn't necessarily a easy or positive thing. It's a responsibility. It's a burden.
Big
But
time.
yeah.
Well said. Beautiful.
Okay.
All right, thank you guys. That ends chapter 6. Amazing. Okay, the continue. Oh, so next Wednesday, as I mentioned, we won't have a Tanya class because it's the holiday of Shavuot. We would love for you to join us. So we'll take this up in 2 weeks, God willing, in the middle of June. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
Jara.